This is the Sensitive CEO Show, igniting sensitive entrepreneurs to grow your heart-centered business. I'm your host, Rose Cox, and this podcast shares with you inspiring and thought-provoking conversations for sensitive entrepreneurs wanting to grow a sustainable online business in a way that feels exciting and aligned with your soul. Along with my carefully curated expert guests, we share science-backed advice, proven strategies, and the systems we use to succeed in our businesses and our lives as highly sensitives, empaths, and introverts. And by the way, if you'd like to be updated on when each episode is released, you can subscribe to the short and sweet newsletter. You'll also get weekly recommendations and tips, especially for HSPs, empaths, and introverts. To subscribe, just pop on over to the website sensitiveceo.show or rosecox.com/pod. Now on to today's show. Hey, it's Rose, and welcome to another episode of the Sensitive CEO Show. In this episode, I have the pleasure of talking with Kristin Quiroz Bayona. And Kristin is a podcasting expert, producer, and host who teaches business owners the strategies and action steps for creating powerful, purposeful podcasts that grow their communities and income. Welcome, Kristin. It's fabulous to talk with you today.
Thank you so much for having me today, Rose. I'm excited to chat with you about all things podcasting.
Me too. And it's very fitting because, as you know, you're one of my very early guests on this new podcast. So it's I'm going to be fascinated by this discussion as well. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to share anything I can to help your audience.
Excellent. Thank you. So before we dive in, I would love you to share what got you onto this podcasting journey.
Yeah. So I worked in marketing and corporate communications for about 15 years, and it was fine, but it wasn't where I felt like I was going to thrive. I kind of finally figured that out in the last few years that I was at my corporate job. But what I did like about it and what was a good fit for me was the creativity part, communications. I love just communicating in all different kinds of ways. So I was very much a Jill of all trades. So I dabbled. I'm a dabbler and I'm very curious. So I took all of that experience, and in 2020, like a lot of people during the pandemic, I had to hit a pause on my corporate life. So it gave me the opportunity to pursue other interests, and podcasting was something that I really enjoyed listening to podcasts, but I am an introvert. And so being the host of one felt really scary. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. But I just felt this pull to do it. And I'm so glad that I did, because I realized that it's like, this is where actually introverts can really thrive, and highly sensitive people. And I really think it's a great medium. So I started my podcast in 2020, and then I started a second one in 2021. After a year of podcasting, I realized, I could help other entrepreneurs on their journey, help them start a podcast. I have all these other communication skills that lend into, promoting a podcast and creating it, and the assets and the writing. So that's kind of how my journey went from the corporate to the entrepreneurial into just this love of all things podcasting.
Brilliant. What a great journey, and a great background to have the marketing and the communications.
Yeah, it seems to be definitely complementary. So
Yeah. And I know we worked together a while ago, and you helped me with my messaging for my new podcast. So
that was so much fun.
Yeah, it was so much fun, and it really helped me because this was something I've been thinking about for a while, but I didn't really know where to start. So having that session with you and really nailing in my message and even the name of the podcast, it was great to bounce ideas off you, and I could tell that your communication and marketing skills were definitely well used in that session.
Yeah, I didn't realize until recently, like especially in the last couple years of my career, I was really positioning thought leaders. Like I was tapping into our CEOs, our executives, and figuring out how to, what do they know that they're brilliant at? How can we put them in front of the right people? How can we create, strategies around them? So I don't know why it dawned on me. It took me so long to make that connection. But I was like, oh, wait. So, similarly, it's like with entrepreneurs that I'm working with, it's like, how do we get all your brilliance? Like, how do we shine a light on that and create a podcast that just really amplifies all of that? So it's fun. It's fun. I love working with people like you. I love working with entrepreneurs. So
Brilliant. And you mentioned before about being introverted and highly sensitive, and it being a good fit for having a podcast. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
yeah. So I think I thought that podcasting was really for someone who was more like to be in the spotlight, someone who was kind of on. But what I realized as I started my podcast was that, oh, it's actually really great for introverts because of so many reasons. So, a lot of podcasting you actually have to do on your own, right? Like the conversation part, this time we have together, it's what, like 30 minutes. But all the behind the scenes, like that really requires you to have alone time. And as introverts, we love our alone time and we're perfectly comfortable doing all the things that need to be done to produce a show. We typically love having meaningful, deep, like one-on-one conversations. It's kind of where we thrive. We're not big on small talk and superficial talk. And you can really tap into that gift with a podcast like we're doing here. Like I know when I'm interviewing people, oh, it's just my jam. I'm just so like engaged into this person and finding out their story and really getting that meaningful conversation. And I think too, for maybe more along the highly sensitive person, it is a medium that's kinder to our nervous system because it gives us space, right? So we can record this interview or we can record a solo episode. And then we know that we have the space to go back and edit. It's not like a live where like that's a highly taxing thing for someone who, is an introvert, is a highly sensitive person. And so we get just that little buffer that I think most of us need to feel comfortable, feel like we're kind of in our zone. And so there's just a few reasons why I just realized in my journey, like, oh, this medium of podcasting is actually really suited for us, people like us. And it's fantastic to have something where it's like, wow, so many of my strengths are playing into being a podcaster, having a podcast.
That makes so much sense. And I love, like, I'm a bit like you, I love tinkering behind the scenes and I'm very curious. And but yeah, the alone time is wonderful to work on things. And then the deep conversations, I really, really enjoy talking one-on-one, but with a group, I just fade into the background quite often.
Yeah. Same here.
Yeah. So when we went through our messaging session, you talked about the importance of connecting my podcast to my values and zone of genius and my mission. I would love you to share a little bit about that for people who are wanting to start their podcast and why it's so important.
Yeah. So I really promote, starting a heart-centered podcast, but I help entrepreneurs launch heart-centered podcasts. And it's really not a buzzword. It's really about, when you are so lit up by what you're creating, when you really believe in what you're doing, a lot of the time the podcast is an extension of your business. So you've put a lot of heart into your business. You have hopefully a very clear mission. And so it's just tapping into that and infusing that into your podcast, because that's how you're going to build that really intimate and genuine relationship with your audience and really build that aligned community and attract your dream clients, your dream listeners. And so that's where I like to start, is with your values, with your zone of genius, because anytime you can connect something to something that's so meaningful to you and so much a part of your core values and your business's values, you're just going to have a much better result because you believe in it. And people are so drawn to that. People are so drawn to that moment when, and even if they're not seeing you, they can hear it in your voice. When you're just lit up by something or fired up by something or just have a passion for what you do. And so that's why I just think it's so, so important to start there. And then also, anytime that like we are in integrity, we're operating fully from our values, that gives our listeners permission to do the same. Like we're being an example of what that looks like. And really, I think isn't that like what we all want for our community, is for them to feel like, hey, you can show up just as you are. And that's all that I know I wish for my community. And so if I can be a model of that as I'm, in anything that I do, but in this instance as a podcaster, then I think that's another really special thing that you can provide to your listeners, is like, oh, that's an example of someone just fully owning, what they really love and what they're really great at. And maybe I can do that too. So it has a little bit of inspirational, empowering component to it as well.
Yeah, I love that. I've listened to podcasts for many years, and I've always been inspired by, conversations. And like you said in the beginning, you didn't think that you would be able to be a host yourself. And I always thought the same. But then I realized I have so many experiences and learnings and growths that have come over the years of running different businesses and just through life in general, really. And just sharing that authentically does lead to inspiration, inspiring others that, yeah, they can do it too. And that's my hope for this podcast as well.
Yeah, we have so much experience, like you said, and so much wisdom to draw on. And so it's just, creating a space where we can share that with people and they can, get so much out of it.
And I love what you touched on before about, even though if people might not be able to see us, they'll be able to hear in our voice our passion. And especially, I think, as introverts and sensitives and empaths, we definitely can hear through the podcast, and that feeling comes through.
Yes, I know we are people who listen. Like we're great observers and we're great listeners. So if anyone's going to pick up on that nuance, it's going to be us, right? We lean in and we're like searching for that, the subtlety. And I was actually reminding me of something that I told you around when you record to smile.
Yes.
That little tip. And it's so like silly and simple, but you can tell when someone is smiling, you can hear it in their voice. So similarly, like we're talking about, when you have that like lit up feeling, like people can hear the difference in your voice. It doesn't always have to be like the visual, which we are so bombarded with a lot of the time. So sometimes the podcast is a nice break from having to see the imagery. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And recording, I know I've just come off doing a series of interviews for the HSP Entrepreneur Summit. And although I love it, I actually really like the podcast because I don't have to put on any makeup. Not that I don't mind putting on makeup, but sometimes I just can't be bothered. And, not having to worry about how you look or come across. And
oh, yeah, that is like, to have a content marketing tool, which essentially it is, where you can just roll out of bed in the morning and your PJs and record. What's better than that? Yeah.
Not that we have our PJs. Oh, we might actually. No one can see us but us. So you mentioned it being a content marketing strategy. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how to incorporate the podcasts into your content marketing strategy?
Yeah. So because I think podcasting is so powerful and it's such a great way to create an intimate connection with your community, because I mean, for one thing, you can have intimate conversations like this, but also the way it's consumed is a very intimate experience, right? Like your voice is literally in someone's ears. They're taking you along, like they're incorporating you within their day. So you're going on their dog walk, you're, washing dishes with them. So it is this like, it just has a certain, I think, a higher level of like this connection and intimacy. And so that's why I like to start with the podcast as the top of the strategy, like funnel, if you will. So because you have such a powerful piece of content, what I do and what I help my clients do is basically repurpose that across all of your channels. So if you start with that at the top of your strategy, like this is the piece of content that I'm going to kind of pour my heart into, then you have something that you can create social media posts with, and you can create so many different types of posts because you can do audio, audiograms, you can do infographics, you can pull out quotes, you can pull out the bullet points. Like, there's so many opportunities there, and that's just for social media. But you can also use that content to send to your email subscriber list. I post on LinkedIn as well as the other social platforms. And I create stories. Like, there are just so many opportunities to repurpose this one piece of content that you've put so much into already. And I think for us entrepreneurs, it really is smart to be a repurposer, to be smart about what we're creating and how can we leverage it across as many different channels. And so it kind of sounds like, okay, if you have a weekly podcast, that means you have one really strong piece of weekly content that you can use. And not to say that you can't incorporate other things, but if you start there, I mean, so much of the work is done for you. So to me, that's how I use mine. I post 2 episodes a week. One's a solo and one's a interview. But even if you just had one, you could still leverage that pretty far in your marketing strategy. And then that's just, with the content. If you think about how, like, I'm on your podcast now, so many of my guests, I've been on their podcasts and I've gotten invites that way. So then it's also a networking opportunity. So that's part of your marketing strategy. So it's got a lot of legs. And there's a lot of different ways that I found it beneficial. Like, I've just grown my network because I only interview women entrepreneurs. So now I have this amazing group of women entrepreneurs that I can tap into and they can tap into me. So that's how I help entrepreneurs to really leverage podcasting.
I love that. And it's like, I guess it's like having your lead content for the week and then taking snippets of that and posting it in different places on social media. It's such a smart way of running the business, isn't it? Having that, repurposing system in the background without having to think up new content every day to post on social.
Yeah, I think the content generating part of entrepreneurship is what trips a lot of us up, me included, in the beginning. And I was like, gosh, I'm spending so much time trying to come up with ideas. And I'm a creative person. So I was like, oh gosh, usually I have a ton of ideas, but like if I'm feeling kind of taxed, by this, having to keep up this cadence, then I know a lot of other people are feeling the same way. So for me, it's just made things so much easier in terms of having something that I believe in that I can put out, every week. And that's really important to me because I'm so tied to my mission. So it's like, I don't want to spend all this time on something that is not going to resonate with people and is not going to feel really good to me. So that's just another. And then, also you're thinking, and I didn't mention this, but you're also tapping into other audiences if you have interviews, right? So it's just like layered in terms of the benefits and what you can see from having a podcast.
Definitely. It's definitely a wonderful way to get in front of different audiences and audiences that generally would be aligned with you, because I'm sure with you as well, but the guests that I'm inviting are aligned with my values and my business, and that I guess they've got their followers who would be aligned as well. So it really is a win-win for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, because they're getting in front of your audience and, you're getting in front of theirs. And that's what I love about it too, is that it's such a mutually beneficial medium. And I love collaboration. So I like it when, like you said, there's that win-win component to, being on someone's show.
Yeah. In fact, there's another win. It's win-win-win, because it's also a win for the audience, because you're sharing information to the audience, which is about what they're aligned with and their interests.
Yeah, you're giving so much value.
Yeah.
Because they get to tap into your learnings and your experiences as the interviewer. And then they're also getting what your guest is on to share. So yeah, it's a lot of value that you're providing. And I like to remind the people I work with and that, you are providing so much value, because I think it can get a little lost sometimes, like, oh, everyone has a podcast, or I'm just putting out a podcast, but it's a very valuable piece of content.
Yeah, definitely. And I was listening to, funnily enough, listening to a podcast this morning on my walk, and the lady speaking was talking about how podcasting, some people think podcasting is a saturated market, but if there's a lot of podcasts that are talking about your topic, then there's obviously a lot of people that are interested, and a topic never gets exhausted. Like, you would never find a podcast and think, right, that's the only one I'm ever going to listen to. I've found what I want. There's always different points of view that are interesting to follow and listen to.
Yeah. And I think, if anything, it spurs your curiosity about a topic. Yeah. Because you heard it from that perspective, but what does this person think? At least that's the way my mind works. Like you, I'm also a curious person. But I think that argument about, oversaturation, that can be applied to anything. I mean, how many coaches are there? How many marketing, business coaches are there? Like, there's so many of one thing. I think that's another reason why it's so important to tap into, going back to your other question, your zone of genius, your experiences, your perspective, because that's your differentiator. You are the person that's going to set your podcast apart, because no one else has those experiences, learnings like you do. Like you said, you have that unique perspective that you're sharing. And the more you can lean into that, the more that's going to set you apart from everyone else. So it's just another reason to just really tap into yourself. And I know it sounds kind of funny. It's kind of like, it's this idea of centering you in your message, but it's in a way that people can relate to, and people can give them a sense of like belonging, and that they're seen through your experiences, I think is the way, that to kind of approach it.
I love that. I've got all these questions popping out, and I know we are coming up for time, but I've got to ask you a couple more questions. If someone was thinking about doing a podcast, where would you suggest they start?
Yeah, I would start with why you want to start a podcast. I think, what I usually walk clients through, and actually have a free resource that I can share, but it's getting that podcast vision down. So as an entrepreneur, you want to understand, like we talked about, what are you bringing to the table? Because that's going to be your quote unquote secret sauce. You are it. And then who do you want to reach? Get really clear on like, who is my audience? How do I want to provide value? Like we talked about earlier. And then how is this going to impact my business? Because if you're using this to grow your business, what is that going to look like? How much time and resources do I have? What do I want to commit to it? What feels good? What feels spacious? What resources do I need? So I do have a workbook that goes into depth and asks questions around all of these topics. But for me, when you have that clear vision, that's when you really set yourself up for success, right? Because you get really committed to the idea of, oh, that's what I want. And it just kind of helps be your like North Star to getting there. And it builds a great foundation because you know why you're doing what you're doing and you know what the potential impact is. So that's where I tell people to start. And then all the other things just can kind of fall into place in terms of like the tech and you actually going through the exercise does help you with your summary and creating your assets. So that's where I tell people to start.
Brilliant. And for people who aren't quite ready to start their own podcast, but they want to maybe be guest speakers on other people's podcasts, how would you recommend they reach out?
So most podcasters should have a form on their website or a way that you can apply to be on their show. And if they don't, you could reach out in the DMs on Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever you hang out. But when you do that, a form is easier because they're going to be asking you specific questions about why you want to be on the show. But if you do just sort of see someone, do your research on your podcasts. I'm trying to think. I think Podchaser is where you can look up.
Yeah, Podchaser's got a wealth of information. It's a great resource.
Yeah, it's great. You can do a search and on topics if you're an entrepreneur or you're a highly sensitive person or whatever type of podcast you want to be on, you could do a search and gather a list of, which ones look good, which ones look aligned with me and like what I can talk about. And then from there, go and see if they have a form. If they don't have a form, maybe start following them online and engaging with them and then work your way up to, hey, sending a message, hey, I think I'd be a really great fit for your podcast. This is what I think I would, or how I would add value to your listeners, and just make sure you let them know why you think you'll be a good fit and how you'll provide, something that their audience will be interested in. So that's where I would start doing searches, researching podcasts that look like they'd be a good fit, and then doing some little bit of engaging before outreaching, I think is always nice, right?
Yeah.
I think we always like that.
Yeah, sort of getting to know. It's kind of like courting, but yeah.
Yeah.
getting to know. Yeah.
Yes.
I love that. That's brilliant advice. Well, we are coming up for time, so we'll wrap this up now. But thank you so much, Kristin. And I will pop your link to your wonderful workbook in the show notes and everywhere else where people can find you and learn more about you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on, Rose. This was such a fun conversation.
Oh, I loved it. Thank you for being a guest, and I'm sure we'll connect again soon.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Sensitive CEO Show. If you enjoyed this episode, or if you think it would be useful for someone else, please leave me a review on sensitiveceo.show. Just follow the prompt in the menu. Each month, I'm offering one lucky reviewer a chance to win a 1-hour business and mindset audit with me. This in-depth audit covers the 5 pillars of your online business, and you'll walk away with super clear action steps specifically for you and your business. You'll be re-energized and motivated to step into your greatness. You'll also find all of the show notes for each episode on the website sensitiveceo.show. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe to the short and sweet newsletter. You'll get weekly recommendations and tips, especially for HSPs, empaths, and introverts. And as the name implies, the email is short and sweet. the Sensitive CEO Show, igniting your sensitive superpowers.